3, 2, 1. Let's go! I am Casey. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for being here just to listen to me rattle on about what we watched last week. Well, mostly, it's more than just about what we watched. It's about the stories we got into, whether it's the movies, TV, books, or it could be magazines if we read magazines. We didn't this week. This is a show just kind of about spreading love for the things we love, so do not think anything here is intended to be any sort of in-depth criticism or review of anything we are discussing. There are definitely going to be criticisms in there, but when it comes down to it, people made these and I absolutely did not. I'm just talking about their achievements. And just a heads up, looking to get a big DC video up later this week, if that sounds fun to you. That's all I have in the ways of updates and introductions, so let's get into the last week of July 2024. 1962's Carnival of Souls. Here we follow the maybe lone survivor of a traumatic car crash being haunted by seemingly random phantoms while having bouts of being invisible to the rest of the world. And seemingly random. And all this poor girl wants to do is play the fucking organ. Carnival of Souls is slow and awkward, intentionally so in a way that definitely invokes series like The Twilight Zone and things along that nature. So it is also very surreal in its atmosphere with a witty lead character and enough anxiety to keep the entire movie tense throughout. 2020's Justice League Dark Apokalips War. So if you've seen the Crisis on Infinite Earth trilogy of 2023 and 24, do the revelations there change any of your thoughts on this movie retroactively? I don't know if it does for me, but I am definitely glad I got to watch it before this movie again. It adds a little more context, but it doesn't change my hating this as a conclusion to the DC AMU. Or this part of it, anyway. I don't think the movie is poorly made. I think a lot of people would call it their favorite from the series for good reason. Its story moves quickly and concisely, never taking too much time for anything to settle before it moves on to the next story beat with solid and fun character writing and witty dialogue throughout. But, I mean, this movie earns that dark moniker. And maybe I'm just tired of these grim dark stories where you watch heroes be torn limb from limb and left emotionally shattered in a puddle of their own misery. But equally, I do think this is just such a disappointing way to watch this part of the story end. Outside of 12 characters, every single named character is dead. And outside of 2 of those characters, every character is essentially reset back to 0. Every single success, every struggle has been for nothing because these heroes utterly failed in the end, and their last hope is to unplug the universe and to plug it back in like it's the Wi-Fi. Which sucks because this gave us a great conclusion to Damian Wayne's arc throughout this entire universe. And his moment of happiness might as well be capped off with him staring into a nuclear explosion because his story is done. Oh yeah, what is the movie about? Well, Cyborg has been asleep raging from the beginning, and when Darkseid gets an army of doomsday monsters together, Cyborg is finally activated and leads everyone to their deaths, torment and reprogramming, or just tortured and left on post-apocalypse Earth with a week left before it's destroyed. Our last-ditch effort Justice League on a suicide mission, not to be confused with the Suicide Squad who we do team up with in the movie. Our Justice League Dark staple John Constantine, a depowered Superman, Etrigan the Demon, Raven, and Damian Wayne in a Robin costume. 1985's Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. Do you think the franchise would have truly followed Tommy Jarvis if Corey Feldman had starred in the movie like he was supposed to? Also, does anybody have a good source on that, piece of trivia, because I couldn't find one easily? Unsure if this movie would have changed much, as his character is just recast and only aged up a few years, or if Tommy Jarvis would have taken Reggie's role maybe. Either way, as it stands, A New Beginning is that Friday the 13th where a bunch of mental health patients get murdered by the least satisfying bait and switch we could have gotten. Outside of the big killer reveal, I do appreciate the overall low-budget vibe the movie gives off, as well as the creativity in the setup and the actors and all of the decisions they ended up making individually. Not Jason's kills are also some of the most creative in the series, looking at Tina and Eddie both individually and as a combo. In contrast, I don't love how exploitative it feels the movie was behind the scenes, and I know this isn't the first time we've had that, equally glaring at Part 3. but it feels especially abusive in the behind the scenes of Part 5. And I've also never been a big fan of killing off a bunch of mental health patients in any setting or story. History has already been dark enough to people with impairments like that. 2015's Nightwing and Robin. At 55 seconds, I don't know why you wouldn't at least put this on as a curiosity. It's on YouTube for free. Simply, it's an extremely short where Nightwing and Robin fight the Scarecrow. It's entirely set up for the movie that comes next in the timeline, Batman vs. Robin, but that's okay and it's done pretty well. I would much rather have, a whole Nightwing movie, but I would also rather have a minute of this than nothing at all. Doctor Who, the Daleks Master Plan from 1966. Time to pay off all that setup we got in Mission to the Unknown, where the Doctor, Steven, and his brand new companion Katarina, whom didn't get much to do in the last serial, just kind of working in the background of Troy, and their epic journey to keep the core of the Time Destructor away from the Daleks and their allies who want to nondescriptly conquer the universe. The idea of Katarina as a companion has always fascinated me, a companion who is so out of time that they have no concept of science outside of kind of magic. Color me surprised that we get virtually nothing out of this idea, outside of a great speech from the first Doctor about the arc we could have gotten. We then speedrun through 2 additional companions, both really interesting military types who have their entire worldviews changed throughout the story, before both are surprisingly lost as well, setting up the next story for just the Doctor and Steven to go on an adventure. The danger the TARDIS crew is in because of the Daleks and their master plan does feel real and palpable. That's what happens when 3 named characters are killed throughout the serial. It makes a cat and mouse story about keeping the MacGuffin out of the bad guy's hands, padded out across 12 episodes of time and space hopping, as engaging as it possibly can. But this is possibly one of the worst serials to still be missing. The 2003 loose cannon reconstructions do their best and are really, really well done, but you can definitely feel the loss of dynamic movement in the 10 episodes that are still missing. This is the first time it felt like real homework to get through a whole story as it currently exists, and that's disappointing. I needed to reference plot summaries and Josh Snare's excellent documentary on the story to fully understand and appreciate the serial as it is. Oh, and episode 7 is randomly a Christmas episode that doesn't really tie into anything else, but I found it really fun and charming. 1992's Dark Force Rising, as read by Mark Thompson. Now that introductions are out of the way and a new big MacGuffin is introduced in the Katana fleet, the titular Dark Force, a lost armada of battle-ready heavy space cruisers that our big bad Grand Admiral Thrawn is after to boost the Imperial Remnant's numbers, and the heroes naturally don't want that to happen. The primary person who knows the Katana fleet's location is that suave motherfucker Talon Card, so he and Mara Jade still get to be exceptionally relevant while Leia goes off with Chewbacca to have the best political B-plot in Star Wars history. I definitely don't think it is easy to make the second part of a trilogy as engaging as Dark Force Rising is, or, The Empire Strikes Back for that matter, where the first installment always gets these fun introductions and you usually get a really meaty first act, and the conclusion is built on ending in a satisfying way. An intentional part 2 of 3 doesn't get these built-in attractions. In fact, it usually has to end on a bit of a downer to make part 3 of 3 that much more exciting. It takes real mastery from a writer like Timothy Zahn to keep the story as engaging and fun as it continues to be. Again, listening to Mark Thompson's audiobook adaptation on the free Libby app, can't recommend that enough. Thompson is really great at doing impressions of the main cast. He is an amazing actor in his own right. While he obviously cannot imitate everyone perfectly, every character is unique, and characters that we know are read with the familiar cadence or accent to make it a very clean listening experience. I did the bulk of this listen along, driving 10 hours one way and back, and not once did I get lost or confused with where the story was. Everything rolled together. This is probably my favorite middle installment of any Star Wars trilogy, over The Empire Strikes Back, over Attack of the Clones, over The Last Jedi. The conclusion is both melancholy and foreboding, but satisfying in a way that we win a conflict. I do already know how this story ends, but I am not any less enthusiastic to reabsorb The Last Command as soon as that is available. 2024's bigger with Brennan and Izzy. So, Dropout staples Brennan and Izzy, one of the most real and genuine, I hope, on-screen relationships, unsurprisingly bounce off of each other and feed off of each other's energy in a really amazing way in this recording of the improv special Bigger, where the pair take wild stories from the audience and just go bigger. From exploding hamsters to forging report card grades, the audience does not fail to give the duo great material to work with and to elevate throughout the short but hilarious special. 1996's Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. So we all know this was supposed to be a King Kong movie, right? The lightning, the damsel, the not Skull Island setting. So comparing this with the King Kong movie we got in King Kong Escapes, do you think Toho made the right move switching him with Godzilla here? As it was released, Ebirah follows a trio of dude bros looking for a lost brother and the master thief they kind of stumble upon, their ship wrecking, thanks to the titular Ebirah, on the vaguely tropical Lychee Island where they save some infant islanders with a trafficking victim. Fight terrorists and wake up Godzilla to do the heavy lifting and escape. Oh, and Mothra's there too. Oh, and a giant condor's there too. Is the human story grounded? No. But it's fun and pushes the plot forward pretty much constantly while the movie uses its budget and island setting to give us a handful of pretty dynamic Showa-era kaiju fights, thanks to some interesting camera decisions and actors who have now become the first veterans in their specialized field of suit acting. You can tell the suit actors are getting better in the suits, and the suits are getting better as well. Mix that with some well-performed and interesting characters, and you have a movie that I find myself especially fond of, which I also feel puts me in some kind of minority when it comes to this movie. I mean, the Godzilla, the Mothra, and the giant condor costumes have always felt like they were falling apart, which I think is a part of that, but Ebirah itself, in the context of the movie, is executed way better than you'd think a giant shrimp monster could be. 1987's A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. 3 movies into A Nightmare on Elm Street, familiar faces return as Nancy Thompson comes back to Elm Street when a new group of protagonist teens are taken to a mental hospital for having nightmares from a dude their parents lynched back in the day. I normally have an immediate aversion to horror movies with a mental health clinic setting. I said this before, I think people with mental health disabilities and disorders are stigmatized enough already. But Nightmare 3 handles it really well by giving each of its victims, teens, strong personalities that carry over into real power in the dream world. These new characters mixed with returning cast tie the production together in an exceptionally congruent way with the first Nightmare on Elm Street. This is also where the series owns up to the vague promises of a humorous Freddy Krueger in part 1, giving us a touch more humor through the one-liners delivered by the perpetually creepy Krueger. While the fan favorite has always been Jennifer's prime time bit, I have always found Philip's marionette death to be my favorite kill in the entire franchise. And it never gets talked about. His veins being ripped open and forced to walk to his doom has always felt particularly visceral in an 80s movie. 2024's Humane. Goddamn, Cronenberg's went and made another Cronenberg. This time from first-time director Caitlin Cronenberg, Humane leans more into the themes of class divide, family, and psychological terror than body horror, but don't worry, there's still plenty of body horror there in the end. When in the not-too-distant future, overpopulation has forced the government to encourage assisted suicide and is on the verge of instituting a mandatory draft, a very well-off but dysfunctional family are gathered together by a very successful patriarch for family fun. When it turns south and people who think they would not be affected by nonsense like a draft are fast-tracked into making some fucking decisions. Outside of many quick character 180s, this is an absolutely remarkable production from a first-time director with only 2 shorts under her public belt. The performers each knock their individual roles out of the park, the movie is exceptionally well shot, and the messaging is pretty poignant. And that's probably the biggest turnoff I'd imagine, so if talking about climate change and hypocritical politicians and class warfare is gonna piss you off, then definitely fair warning. 1962's The 300 Spartans. You ever wonder what would have happened if they made a 300 movie back in the height of Ray Harryhausen's sword and sandal epics? This is exactly that. You get a very straightforward and even more anglicized adaptation of the Battle of Thermopylae, where the battle will lead to a unified Greece thanks to Spartan armor and sacrifice. Oh, plus an extremely contrived tragic romance to spice things up, I guess. This adaptation is very much of its time. Everything is staged and performed in the way of a Shakespearean stage epic. It's probably the reason we get a forced love story entirely out of fiction. The movie also has a vastly superior depiction of the Persian Empire, depicting them as antagonists, but humans with their own culture, and not some sadomasochistic deformed monster people. Deadpool and Wolverine from 2024. Deadpool and Wolverine definitely feels more like a Marvel movie than Deadpool 3 to me. That doesn't mean it still isn't very much Deadpool. We are just tripling down on the quips and winking at the camera. It does feel like we've taken a step back character-wise as well, retreading similar character beats covered in both the first Deadpool as well as in Logan, that being Deadpool having to get back into a romance with Vanessa and Wolverine needing to, get over his fucking trauma. And while many of the references are definitely intentional, reverting the characters back feels less so, or if it was intentional, it feels very studio mandated. I still very much enjoyed just about the entire adventure. It is energetic, and both leads bring everything they have to the roles that they have made their own over the years. The action sequences are dynamic and as bloody and ever, and Dogpool is, a perfect little treat. Twisters from 2024! After a traumatizing for the characters opening scene, we watch our protagonist, Tornado Scientist, get over her PTSD by being guilted and driven directly into it. We also get a little B-plot about those damn capitalists profiteering off victims' vulnerability. Oh, and we also have a horny for each other C-plot, because sure, why not? The mix of themes in tackling elitism and overcoming trauma with a cute little romance makes this feel like a modern disaster movie that doesn't feel like post-9/11 disaster porn, if that distinction makes sense. But heads up, and this is definitely not a comment on quality, but this is more so another Twister instead of a real Twister sequel with returning characters or continuing story, and that is absolutely okay. But yeah, thank you so much for sitting with me and talking about what we watched last week. I hope everyone got to watch something special and fun last week in their own right. I'd love to hear about whatever that was for you. One more time, what we are releasing that isn't our weekly scheduled nonsense is a video on what Detective Comics means to people, but that's all I've really got. Go out and give a loved one a call out of the blue and make someone's day. Thank you so much.